Here's an idea. There's more to video game boss fights than just fighting video game bosses. I speak in public a fair amount. I also make theater and I do some performance work. And when doing those things, people tend to ask a similar question. Some version of,
"So, are you nervous?"
And my answer is always no, actually. I don't get stage fright. I don't get nervous, really, not about those types of things, but I do get excited. Which, okay, that distinction may be academic. There's a chance that over many years of being in front of crowds, I've convinced myself excitement is what is going on, even if it is functionally indistinguishable from nerves. But it works. I feel like I can channel excitement into whatever I'm doing. It helps me focus, where nerves are distracting. Nerves are an obsession over potential bad outcomes, but excitement is the useful thrill of possibility. Now, strangely, I find a similar thing happens when playing games. Video games particularly, battling video game bosses especially. Boss fights are an important part of the flow and process of video games, but they also halt both flow and process. They're purposeful and authoritative interruptions of progress, a tonal and structural shift from one kind of passage to another, more self-contained one. A boss fight, a good boss fight at least, is a metonym for the boss's own protectorate, its level, its world or area. And often being enclosed, the stereotypical round room becomes its own hermetically sealed world until the showdown is done. But boss fights are also a metonym for the game as a whole, and games as a whole. When a boss fight begins, it's a dense and difficult knot, seemingly impenetrable, but over time it loosens to become a tangle of pliable threads. Vulnerabilities become clear. In the case of the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, I thought maybe spells from afar, but it turned out stabbing her in the back was the best way to go. Their difficulty, importance, and impressiveness mean that bosses and boss fights loom. Clive Thompson wrote for Wired in 2006 that bosses dominate the psychic landscape of games. Often they also dominate the actual landscape of games. That is especially true if you're playing Shadow of the Colossus, which is what this game is because the bosses are literal giants. Insofar as each game is a journey across a particular landscape, bosses act as landmarks or roadblocks, or both. In the united landscape of all games, in the ecosystem which is comprised of the countless aspects of games and gaming, bosses are ideally a just barely not effective warrior class, hopeful or often momentary apex predators, the top-ish of the food chain, soon deposed by you, the player, benevolent probably, mostly, except when faced with seething, hulking adversity, which may lead one to wonder who really is upsetting the balance in these altercations. Nick Sutner, writing about Shadow of the Colossus, says of defeating the game's first Colossus, "It is clear, even in this first victory, what I'm doing is wrong on some level." Maybe this is true for most, if not the whole history of boss fights. Though it was named Game of Dungeons by its creators, this game is most well known by its file name, DND. It was first released in 1975 for the Play-Doh system. Its golden dragon enemy was the first ever video game boss, and really all he's doing is protecting his magical orb. And here we are, jerkbags rolling in, fixing to swipe it. Though I question whether or not I will ever be able to actually swipe it. This game is so hard it makes me want to throw things. D&D and the Golden Dragon introduced the idea that certain portions of video games were worth protecting by condensing the difficulty the player has learned to deal with and rendering it diamond-like into a single entity, often one which cuts a very imposing figure. For the most part, it's important for bosses to look like things, people, beings, beasts that are bad, to remind us, the players, hey, we are good. even if players are just glorified trespassers and burglars. So here, I am just wandering around a dungeon looking for gold, and it turns out the more gold you have, the more enemies try to attack you, so it's really remarkably like real life. Mo gold related problems. What's symbolized, I think, in the intimidating design of most bosses, and many enemies for that matter, huge, muscular, pyramid-headed, scaled, literally on fire, is a threat to a player's progress by way of a threat to their pixel body. Where harm to one's pixel body is the main failure condition for most video games with bosses, threats to progress and physical threats are more often than not one and the same. Public performance rarely represents a significant physical threat, but the idea of some performance, some event being an impediment to progress maybe makes some sense. Maybe that's why I feel the same way about boss fights as I do about performing. Not nervous, but excited. Where much of the progression through a game, and lots else for that matter, is linear, unfolding bit by bit in response to one's actions, a boss fight, like a performance, is a distinct moment of progress, where linearity often exists, but kind of takes a different form. What unfolds is not the space of the world, but your understanding of it, or of a single powerful entity within it. Gygus, the final boss of Earthbound, is for me the perfect expression of final boss, though various Undertale altercations sit at a very close second. Gygus is powerful, formless-ish, challenging, and defeated ultimately by having characters look within themselves and to what they've learned, and to what you, the player who is called out by name, have learned along the way. True story, the first time that I ever played Earthbound, I was in my 20s, and when this part happened, I screamed so loudly, my girlfriend came downstairs to ask if I was okay. More so than some arrangement of well-worn tropes like giant pig demon or huge metal thing with guns all over it. And beyond whatever ingrained reactions we may have to those tropes, oh my god, it's huge, how will I ever win? Or dang, it's so big, it must be powerful. Boss fights, to me, have become an invitation to know myself, to uncover what I've learned and maybe didn't realize it. I find myself appreciating moments in the not video game portions of my life, performances, important meetings, stretches where my anxiety gets really bad, where I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. I find myself appreciating these moments in a way that I appreciate a boss fight. In case you're wondering, yes, I did rename Ness XKCD. I also tried to rename his PSI spell Rockin' to PSI Internet, but it didn't fit, so it says PSI Intern. Boss fights are intense, compact moments of self-literacy. They're an opportunity to know what your reflexes are and to exercise the muscles that counteract those reflexes. Boss fights, be they giant knights, dark knights, or sold out knights, are about learning to respect the momentum of the situation and its possibility more than your own comfort. A good boss fight, video game or not, asks that you use yourself in some previously unimagined way. And while it may or may not punish you inordinately for failure, neither does it forgive or repay stubbornness. Let me know your thoughts about boss fights in the comments. I'm especially curious to hear what people have to say about games that don't have bosses or even really adversity. We talked about like Shadow of the Colossus, which is a game that has basically only boss fights, and then there's that game Fury that just recently came out. But what about games like Dear Esther or Gone Home or Passage, which, you know, not only do they not have bosses, they don't have really aggressors of any kind. Does that mean that there isn't a challenge or that they can't provide these moments of self-knowledge? What about those games can we say is boss fight-like, if anything. In this week's comment response video, we talk about your thoughts regarding Marshall McLuhan's theory about hot and cold media. If you wanna watch that one, you can click here or find a link in the doobly-doo. We have a Facebook on IRC and a subreddit, links in the doobly-doo, and the tweet of the week comes from Luke Gobert, who points us towards a Heritage Minute, which were these sort of like little informational spots that would play on Canadian television a couple decades back about, famous Canadians, and there is, I didn't know this, one about Marshall McLuhan, which is beautifully nonsensical. I highly recommend watching it. But runner-up for tweet/tweets of the week are those from folks like Adam Krantz, who finally received their Idea Channel postmodernism hats. They look super rad. And last but certainly not least, this week's episode would not have been possible or good without the very hard work of these people whose true form we cannot fully fathom.